Hello everyone and welcome back, it's Sakiziel here, and tonight I'll be reacting to Spirit Stones and Infinity Circuits 5-minute lore episode 32 by Old Man Reacts. As always, I highly recommend you check out his channel if you're not doing so already and subscribe to him. He makes great content, and it's always been fun to listen to his rants. And there'll be a link to the original video in the description box below. But without further ado, let us see what he has to say about the Eldar Afterlife and, well, their plan A
General
for
Medicaid warning.
beating
The views
Slaanesh.
expressed in 5-ish-minute lore, the lore delivered in rants, are sanctioned by their
But
scholar
I know,
Havinium as excess rageous. Prolonged
the
exposure can
original
result
plan
in loss of
before
IQ,
Yanid
high
came
blood
up
pressure, random outbursts,
was
and blunt force
get
trauma to
enough
the skull,
Eldar souls
resulting
into
in
the Infinity
unconsciousness.
Circuits that
Please
when
consult your local
combined,
physician for
they'd
more
be able to just
information.
slay Slaanesh and
Eld-
free all the Eldar souls that Slaanesh has ever eaten. Which, by the way, I've heard that after Slaanesh, gorged themselves on Eldar souls, they were temporarily the most powerful Chaos God, and then that the other Chaos Gods essentially beat some of the souls out of them while they were, still, well, in that early state.
Dari Spirit Stones, a chastity belt for the soul, and the favorite drug of Slaaneshi cultists everywhere.
Oh yeah, they do grind the Spirit Stones into dust, don't they? And if I remember correctly, Slaaneshi cultists also get a lot of favor for actually turning in Spirit Stones. Said at the Dark Prince of Pleasure can slurp down those souls.
Hey, got a nice spirit stone there. Can I put it in my mouth and cover it in saliva?
These days, the Eldari have a lower population than a one-horse town with no vet, but that hasn't been the case, technically, for that long in the cosmic scale. Back when the Eldari were not an endangered species and hadn't screwed up everything literally through a combination of arrogance and self-indulgence, they were pretty much immortal. I don't mean they were physically immortal, even though their lifespans are flat out ridiculous, with some of the Eldar having been alive during the Great Crusade, and those same Eldar are still able to thumb their noses at the Imperium now. I mean that they were psychically immortal. Before they screwed it all up,
Yeah, them being able to, whenever they die, they just reincarnate themselves.
the Eldari were able to physically die and just hang out in the warp until they decided they would be born into another body. That leads to some really uncomfortable thoughts about just how exactly, when and where they would peek in on their future parents and decide who was going to both sire them and give birth to them. In fact, that's probably why Slaanesh is the way that Slaanesh is. I have ruined your entire day, and if you can't still figure it out, just pause until you cringe so hard your back cracks. You are now welcome. Well, speaking of Slaanesh, when the bouncing baby whatever the hell was born,
Yeah, just a bunch of dead Eldar souls hanging out in the warp, or watching people do the deed, while they wait to decide who's gonna be the one to end up being their parents.
the Eldar found out rather quickly that when they died, they would no longer go to hang out in the warp until they decided to come back to reality. They found out that nothing but existence of pure and absolute horror awaited them. This understanding in and of itself led to the entire species trying to figure out how to not wind up being the soul food of a hungry warp-spawned horror of their own creation.
Yep, and if I remember correctly, the 4 different major Eldar groups all have 4 different ways of doing it.
The first step in this process was trying to find out a way to stop the psychic essences of the Eldar from entering the warp on death, which is not an easy prospect. Well, the Eldar figured out a way. It is said on repeat that desperate times call for desperate measures, and the Eldar were beyond desperate. I would be desperate too if I died, and the first words I heard when I woke up was, "Who wants Daddy's belt?" They were doing everything they could to try to find a way to save themselves when a Farseer named Melindri Silver.
By the way, one of the big reasons as well why they also worry so much about saving themselves, because there's a difference between an Eldar soul and a human soul. A human soul is, comparatively speaking, like a shadow of the person. It's not by them when it goes into the world. An Eldar soul, however, maintains in its full consciousness. So given the state of the warp at the moment, and then pile on top of that, Slaanesh. Yeah, it's they're going to be fully aware to process all the unspeakable things that are going to be done to them.
Soul from the craft world of Iliaden found out how to save the Eldar from being snatched up on death. When she told her fellow Eldar what her thoughts were, I can only imagine the pucker factor, because while I normally consider most Eldar tight asses at the best of times, by the end of that conversation I can say without hesitation, they were all well and truly crapping diamonds from the amount of compression involved. To make it absolutely 100% clear, what she was recommending was so insanely dangerous that even a Kriegsguardsman would pause, stick his head up, and ask for clarification.
Yep, which is go to the Crone worlds. The worlds that were in the center of the Eldar Empire, that got swallowed up by the Eye of Terror itself, and go there to mine Spirit Stones.
Melindri looked at her fellow Eldar, who were literally terrified of dying, and told them that to protect their souls, they needed to go to the heart of the old Aldari Empire, to a place now known as the Crone Worlds. It sounds so simple, until you remember that the Crone Worlds were all swallowed by the Eye of Terror, and now literally sit in Slaanesh's backyard. And also the fact that the second the Eldar showed up in the warp, legitimately everything there would notice. Believe me, I tried coming up with a metaphor for how absolutely horrifying this would be to the Eldar, but words absolutely pale. And there's not a single comparison I could draw up that wouldn't get my channel demonetized, and I wouldn't have a single argument against it. It's that messed up. It's that bad. What should be even more telling is the entirety of Craftworld society not only believed her, but accepted her proposal and went along with it. The Eldar set out en masse for the Eye of Terror to recover specialized gems from the surface of the Crone Worlds that could be modified to protect the Eldar soul from being sucked into the warp.
As they say, any port in a storm, because it's like, well, how many other options they have, really? Because it's like, you either become a Harlequin, in which case I'm not even entirely sure how to pronounce his name. Kegarak? I don't know. How do you pronounce his name? The Laughing God. He protects the Harlequin souls, so Slaanesh can't get them. The Drukhari, he just torture people and continue doing the same debased acts that created Slaanesh in the first place, and essentially refill their souls by topping up on the suffering of others. And the Exodites, if I remember correctly, have something kind of similar to an Infinity Circuit, except the planet they live on, like the actual Maiden World, is the Infinity Circuit.
The death toll was gobsmackingly hilarious by any standard, but the Eldar now had a surplus of what are called Waystones. And with the help of specialized bone singers of the Craft Worlds, they were adapted into the first Eldar Spirit Stones. Spirit Stones became permanent fixture of Eldar fashion and armor, and with disgustingly good reason. Anytime an Eldar dies, the Spirit Stone acts as a trap, drawing the soul of the Eldar inside and keeping it contained. This keeps the soul in real space and out of the warp, and thus away from the grasping teeth of the warp, and in particular, Slaanesh. But what to do now? All you've done at this point is make a very pretty prison, and although it's decidedly better than having your soul chewed on for a few 100,000 years by the warp, you're still in solitary confinement inside of a gem the shape of an oversized almond. Not only that, the Spirit Stone is about as fragile as the mood of a shotgun wedding. In other words, congratulations, you've been saved from having your soul immediately devoured by Slaanesh. Now imagine how screwed up and terrified you'd be if the only thing keeping you from the same fate as before is a glass bottle that cracks if it's stared at hard. Well, Melindri had a solution to that too. At the core of every Eldari craft world is a psychically networked apparatus that, with a few tweaks, would not only allow the dead Eldar to remain secure, but would give them the ability to help their species in the future.
Yep. Which, if I have heard, I'm not entirely sure if this is the case, but I have heard that the Spirit Stones in the Infinity Circuit, it helped to power the craft world, in addition to, the prior stuff of being able to, say, advise the living Eldar, or, give them information from ages past, and, being able to be put into Wraith constructs, as much as many Eldar dislike, doing that.
As with anything the Eldar do, they can't just pop it in and it's good enough. The Craftworld Eldar have a relationship with their building material that borders on the obsessive, but given what they can do with it, I can't say I really blame them. Remember how I said the Eldari use bone singers? Well, their building material is called Wraithbone, and bone singers literally sing what they want to build into being built.
Yep. They use these because, you see, Wraithbone is it's basically solidified warp energy, actually. It is a substance they conjure from the warp or by singing to it, causing it to grow and change shape. And that's also part of the thing where the Eldar are a post-scarcity society in terms of anything that can be made with Wraithbone. Because they can just will more of it into existence, basically.
Imagine a voice so horrible that wood literally decides to become a door to appease the horrible voice, and you've got the right idea. Upon an Eldar dying and the soul being captured into a spirit zone, this is what these bone singers do. They go to one of the Craftworld's biodomes in a place called the Dome of the Crystal Seers. In places like these in the Craftworld, the actual Wraithbone of the Craftworld itself is exposed, and when the Spirit Stone is placed there, apparently a tree of Wraithbone is shaped around it. This might sound strange, but at the same time, it literally surrounds the Spirit Stone in the same material they make their ships out of, and everything else for that matter, including their version of Titans. The second that this happens, the soul can leave the Spirit Stone and join what is now known as the Infinity Circuit. At the end of the day, the Infinity Circuit now exists as two things: an afterlife for the Eldar dead, and a pool of pure psychic energy that can be drawn from to both power and assist the Craftworld if it's needed. Not only that, if the need comes, a dead Eldar can re-inhabit their Spirit Stone and opt to be put inside of a Wraithbone construct, which is literally a dead Eldar wanting to help other creatures join it in being past tense. When the Craftworld Iliaden...
By the way, I always liked how the Wraith Lords looked. Like, even like, well, specifically after they, had the model update where they, well, anyone who's played Dawn of War 1 knows about the old models I'm referring to. Those ones I wasn't a fan of. The models that were used that came out after that, yeah, I like those. I also like how many weapons a single Wraith Lord can end up having on it, because I have seen ones where they have shuriken catapults attached to their arms, also flamers on their arms, and then either a shuriken cannon or a bright lance mounted on the shoulder, which is a fair amount of weaponry in my opinion. It's not exactly going to, well, it doesn't compare to certain things, but I'd say that that'd be probably roughly analogous to a Hellfire Dreadnought.
Finished its modifications and planted its first Spirit Stones, Melindri's Silver Soul gave up her own soul to activate the Infinity Circuit, because of course it would need a soul to turn it on and off again. The invention, risk, and outright need for the Infinity Circuit as well as the Spirit Stones themselves have given the Eldar some small measure of peace when it comes to dying, but a small peace is all they can expect. It also has a secondary knock-on effect of ensuring that whoever attacks a Craftworld will be fighting a species who will fight past the point of any reasoning whatsoever. The Eldar are not just fighting for their homes. If the Craftworld is attacked, they're fighting for their very souls, and the souls of everyone they've ever cared about. At the end of the day, that makes attacking an Eldar Craftworld one of the most dangerous things you can possibly do.
Yep, and speaking of how, well, the fact that you'd be fighting is against people who, they're not only defending their homes, but their own souls after death, and those of everyone they've ever known. So yeah, there's don't expect any of them to back down, and even then, you also have to consider that how many of those Spirit Stones will also get loaded into Wraith constructs. So you're not just fighting the living Eldar, you're also fighting and probably who knows how many of their dead who have come back to help the living fight. I don't remember which craft world it was, but I do know there was one that their numbers got decimated so badly that they actually have to rely on wraith constructs to fill out the ranks of their army. But in addition to that as well, you also kind of wouldn't want to try and attack an Eldar craft world, especially with boarding action, when you consider things like how, Eldar move so fast that by comparison humans move in slow motion. And some of their weapons, when you think about how they work, are absolutely horrifying. Like how, the D cannon that literally rips open a hole into the warp, and you just get exposed to that. Or getting turned into a flesh smoothie by a warp spider's monofilament gun. The death spinner I think it was called. But yeah, that was very fun to watch. I'm looking forward to actually when he makes more of these in the future. Hope you enjoyed watching with me. And if you did, I'd appreciate if you like, comment, and subscribe. But for now, that's all. Have a nice night, everyone. Bye.